Back in the 19th century, horticulturists were looking for some ground cover that would stop soil erosion on hilly roadsides. They found something from Japan that worked really well at first. They planted it, it spread, and it held the soil in place, and soil erosion was stopped. The problem was that kudzu, which we should all be familiar with, had no natural predators here in America, so there was no way to control the growth. And so now when you drive up and down 64 and 95 on the side of the highways, you see this wall of green, which is the kudzu. And it looks kind of pretty until the leaves fall off, and then you see the destruction that it does. Around the same time in Australia, people were looking for a new meat source, a source of meat. And so they found from England these rabbits, and they thought, ooh, this will make some good eating. And so they began to bring some rabbits into Australia, but the rabbits got out, and the rabbits now do over $100 million worth of damage to crops and the land, because rabbits have no natural predators in Australia. So they are free to multiply at will, and they do. It is a real problem in Australia. Ecologists call that an open niche. When you introduce something foreign into an ecosystem and there is nothing to prevent it from exploding, it's called an open niche. And it is incredibly, incredibly disastrous to the entire ecological system. We have to be careful about introducing foreign things into an ecosystem, because once they take root, getting rid of it is really, really difficult. It's easier to keep it out than it is to take it out. King David was a fascinating man in Scripture. He and Saul started out with a very good relationship, a father and a son. David was faithful. David was successful. In fact, he was a victim of his own success because Saul became very jealous of David. Saul became so jealous, in fact, that time and time again, Saul sought to take David's life. In the reading we heard from Samuel today, Saul is on the run. David is on the run from Saul. David and his men are hiding in a cave. And we heard the story. He goes into the camp. And there's Abishai. Abishai telling David, go ahead and take his life. You deserve this, David. You deserve some peace. You've been faithful. He deserves to die at your hand. This is your enemy. Take his life. David, at least at this point in his life, understood that if I let this in now, if I open my heart to this kind of revenge, it'll take over. So David stands firm and he says, no, I will not let this into my heart. He says, no, I will keep this out. I will not harm God's anointed. Later on in the life of David, when he sees the wife of Uriah the Hittite bathing on a rooftop, he wasn't as strong. There was another voice there. Maybe it was Abijah again, saying, go ahead, David, take her. Go ahead and have her. You deserve her. You deserve the pleasure of this woman. And in a moment of weakness, David let it in. David let lust and pride and power into his heart, and the destruction that it caused was overwhelming. It's why Jesus tells his disciples, don't even let it into your heart. He tells his disciples, if someone sins against you, forgive them, love them, pray for them, do good to them. Because if you allow somebody else's sin to come into your own heart and begin to inspire your behavior, it's just like kudzu. Sin is like kudzu in the heart of a Christian. It doesn't even have to be mine. It can be somebody else's. Somebody else does something wrong. I let it into my heart and it's like kudzu. At first it feels kind of good. Doesn't it feel good to even begin to think about people that we don't like getting their comeuppance? There's a momentary glee. We feel good about those thoughts of somebody that we don't like, a politician perhaps, who finally meets justice. It feels good. Jesus warns us against that. Don't let that into your heart because it feels good for a moment, but it will wreak havoc. It is alien to a Christian heart, and if we let it in, it's like kudzu. It's always easier to keep it out than it is to take it out, because once we let it in, it takes root. Once we let it in, it multiplies. Once we let it in, we don't even realize it until later, until the destruction happens. Look at Jussie Smollett. Jussie Smollett, at one time in his life, was thrilled at the idea of a small part in a commercial. He was elated at that part. But then, all those voices telling him you're better than this, you deserve more, all of a sudden, $100,000 an episode is not enough for him. He needs more. He wants more. He let greed into his heart. He let pride get into his heart until it destroyed everything. And you don't notice it until the destruction happens. It feels good at first, but it's only later when we see the destruction that it caused that we realize we would have been much better off keeping it out, because it is so much harder to take it out once it's there than it is to keep it out. It's why Jesus tells us over and over and over to forgive one another. He says it on almost every other page of Scripture. Jesus is telling his disciples, and it's his disciples that he says this to, not the crowd. We talk about the difference between the crowd and the disciples. The crowd get the easy things. The crowd gets the comfort. The crowd gets the encouragement. The disciples get the challenge. It's easy to be a Christian. To be a Christian, all you have to do is get baptized, make a profession of faith, and whammo, you're a Christian. There's nothing at all hard about being a Christian. Discipleship, on the other hand, discipleship is hard. To have the courage to step out of the crowd and be different. To have the courage to step out and refuse to listen to those voices of this world that will always try and move us in the direction of that momentary pleasure that will utterly destroy us if we let it in. Discipleship is not for the weak. Discipleship is not for the lazy. Discipleship is not for people who just want to receive from Jesus. Discipleship is not for you. If that's what you're looking for, if you are looking only for Jesus to heal you, if you are looking only for Jesus to give you something, then discipleship is not for you. He will give it to you because he loves you. He loves the crowd and he fed the crowd. He gave to the crowd. But discipleship is something more. Discipleship is not just about what I can get from Jesus, but what can I do? Discipleship is hard, but brothers and sisters, the payoff is incredible. When we do the hard work of keeping out anger, when we do the hard work of keeping hatred out of our heart, when we do the hard work of keeping lust and pride and other things out of our heart that don't belong there, then we can receive peace. Then we can receive mercy. Then we can receive all the things that Jesus really wants us to have. If we want more peace in our hearts, then we have to work harder to keep out anger. If we want mercy in our lives, we have to work harder to keep out hatred. If we want justice in our hearts, then we have to work harder to keep injustice out. Once we let it in, it takes over. And it's harder to take it out than it is to leave it out. And we always have those two voices. We have the voice of Abishai. We have the voice of the world that is always telling us, take it easy, relax, be a little bit lazy today. You deserve it. You're better than this. There's a voice of the world that wants us to be prideful, a voice of the world that wants us to be greedy, a voice of the world that wants us just to take what we want because we deserve it. And then there's the voice of Jesus saying, keep it out. The voice of Jesus saying, seek after something better. The voice of Jesus saying, if you are faithful in this, you will receive blessings 100-fold. There are always those two voices. Which one will you follow?